Imagine this. You're lying in your bed at night, wrapped in the comfort of your own home, believing you're completely safe. But then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pressing against the silence of the house. A doorknob rattles. A faint knock echoes through the dark. Your heart races as you realize someone or something standing just outside your room. Now, picture living alone in a cabin miles away from civilization. The woods whisper, the walls scratch, and shadows move where no one should be. You hear tapping on the window, but when you look, there's nothing. Or worse, there's someone staring back. And what if the intruder isn't a stranger at all, but someone you know? A knock at the door, a familiar voice, a smile that hides the darkest intentions. Sometimes, the people we fear most aren't strangers in the night they're family. Welcome to The Price Paid. These are not ghost stories. These are real accounts of terror that prove you are never truly alone, even in your own home. Subscribe now, because after tonight, you'll never hear a creak in the dark the same way again. When I was 22, I thought I had found the perfect setup. My parents owned a 2-story house with a finished basement, and I had convinced them to let me rent the lower level for cheap. It was a win for everyone. They got a little extra cash, and I got privacy without having to completely move out. The basement was set up like a small apartment. There was a kitchenette, a living area, a bedroom, a bathroom, even its own side entrance. At the time, it felt like freedom, even though I was technically still under my parents' roof. That weekend, my parents were out of town, which meant I could finally relax without worrying about them walking in on me or giving me side comments about the music being too loud. I invited 2 friends, Anthony and Jay, to come over. We ordered food, grabbed some drinks, blasted music, and watched the hockey game. It felt like the kind of night every young guy wants: no rules, no restrictions, just good company. By the end of the night, we were buzzed enough that neither Anthony nor Jay wanted to drive home. I told them to crash on the oversized couch in the living room. It could easily fit the 2 of them, maybe even 3 if needed. Around 2 in the morning, I said goodnight and retreated to my room. That's when things started to turn. A few hours later, something jolted me awake. At first, I couldn't place it. The room was dark and silent, and for a moment I thought maybe it had just been a dream. Then I heard it. Footsteps, faint but steady, coming from the floor above. At that hour, the only people who could have been upstairs were Anthony or Jay. Maybe one of them went to grab water from the fridge, I thought. But then I heard the doorknob to my room rattle. Someone was trying to open it. I always lock my bedroom door out of habit, and that night it might have saved me. The knob twisted back and forth, then stopped. My heart raced. I whispered Anthony's name, then Jay's, but got no answer. I sat up, frozen, listening. After a minute, I convinced myself it was just one of them drunk, confused about which room was mine, and I managed to fall back asleep. The next morning, Anthony had already left, and Jay was still asleep on the couch. When he finally woke up, I asked if he had tried to come into my room. He looked confused, rubbed his eyes, and said he didn't think so, but couldn't really remember. I brushed it off. The night had been long, and it was easier to believe it was just drunk behavior than to think otherwise. That night, I came home late after spending the day with other friends. I wasn't drunk, just exhausted. I grabbed a snack, washed up, and crawled into bed. For about an hour, I let the TV play in the background until my eyes grew heavy. Just as I turned it off, the quiet hit me, and then so did the sounds. At first, it was subtle. Faint thumps, creaks, like someone moving around upstairs. The same spot I had heard footsteps the night before. My chest tightened, every instinct screaming that something wasn't right. I tried to rationalize it as the house settling, old wood making noises in the night. But then, the doorknob rattled again. This time I jumped out of bed, heart hammering. It wasn't just rattling, it was followed by a soft knock. A knock. At 2 in the morning, my stomach dropped. There was no way it was Anthony or Jay this time. I reached for my phone, texting both of them, texting my parents, anyone who might respond. Nothing. I grabbed the heaviest object within reach and hid behind the dresser, adrenaline flooding my body. I don't know how long I stood there. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe more, waiting for the door to burst open. But the knocking stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. Finally, I called 911. I whispered into the phone, trying to stay quiet but firm. The operator told me to stay put until officers arrived. When they did, they tapped on my bedroom window, and I handed them my spare key. Moments later, I heard the side entrance open and 2 voices calling out. Relief washed over me when I saw their flashlights moving through the basement. The officers searched my space quickly, There were not many places to hide. Then we moved upstairs. Room by room, I pointed out what was what. When they reached my parents' bedroom, I heard a commotion. Shouts. One officer barked at someone to get out. I stepped into the hallway and saw him, a man, crawling out from under my parents' bed. Dirty clothes, gaunt face, eyes filled with something dark and hateful. He looked homeless, deranged, maybe both. They dragged him out, cuffed him, and led him downstairs. I'll never forget the way he looked at me as they walked him past. It was pure malice, like he wanted me to know he hated me just for existing. Later, the police told me that because nothing was stolen and he was homeless, my parents could choose not to press charges. They didn't want the hassle. But I couldn't shake the thought that he might have been inside the house for days, maybe longer. Had he slipped in while we blasted music the first night? Or had he been there before, listening, waiting, moving in the shadows above me while I laughed with my friends below? That basement never felt like home again. Every creak, every thump in the night, I heard differently after that. It wasn't just a house settling, it was the memory of someone who had been there, silently watching, hiding just a floor away. Sometimes the scariest part isn't what happens in the moment. It's realizing how close danger had been all along. There's a certain kind of silence you only find in the woods. It is not the comfortable hush of a city night, nor the steady lull of suburbia. It is heavier, thicker, the kind of silence that makes your ears strain to find meaning in the smallest sound. When I moved into a cabin deep in upstate New York, I thought that silence was peace. I thought I had finally escaped the chaos of city life. The cabin stood miles away from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by acres of forest. From my back deck, I could look out over the trees and the lake behind the house. I spent countless evenings with a beer in hand, watching the sun sink and the stars emerge. Fishing, hiking, the solitude of nature, it felt like I'd carved out my own sanctuary. For years, it stayed that way. Until the night I realized I was not alone. It started small, just the kind of noise you might expect in the woods. A twig snapping in the distance, leaves rustling under some unseen creature's weight. At first, I chalked it up to deer, raccoons, maybe even the wind. But then it began happening every night, and the noises were not just random anymore. They were deliberate. One evening, while sitting on the deck, I heard scratching along the side of the cabin. Not the frantic scramble of an animal, but slow, measured, like someone running their fingernails across the siding. I froze, my beer halfway to my mouth. My heart pounded in my chest as I waited for it to stop. After a few long seconds, the sound vanished, leaving me with only the ringing silence. The next night, it came again closer this time. Scraping just outside the spare bedroom window, I tiptoed through the hallway, flashlight in hand, and peeked through the curtain. The moonlight painted the trees silver, shadows stretching across the clearing. But nothing moved. No raccoon, no deer, no intruder. Just the woods, quiet and endless. Still, something felt wrong. The air felt heavy, charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that isolation was playing tricks on me. But I could not shake the feeling that something was watching me. A few days later, I forced myself to investigate. I entered the spare bedroom, the one I barely used, and the air inside was stale, untouched. As I swept the flashlight across the room, I noticed the closet door was slightly ajar. I was certain I had left it shut. I pulled it open, hard hammering, and found nothing but old coats and boxes. But then, in the corner, caught on the wood, was a shred of fabric. Dark, torn, clinging, like it had been pulled away from someone's clothing. I dropped it, my mind racing. Was someone in here? Had they been hiding in my home? The thought that I might not have been living alone was more terrifying than the woods themselves. That night, I locked every door, every window, and armed myself with a crowbar from the shed. I told myself I was overreacting, but I slept on the couch, baseball bat by my side. The cabin was too quiet, too calm. The next evening, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. At the window. I shot upright, blood running cold. This was no animal. Animals do not knock. I ran down the hallway, adrenaline pushing me forward, and pulled back the curtain. At first, I saw nothing but trees. Then, my eyes adjusted, and there, standing just beyond the glass, was a shape. Tall, human, still. For a moment, the world stopped. I could not breathe, could not blink. The figure did not move, just lingered in the shadows, its face hidden. Then, in an instant, it was gone. Panic surged through me. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight, and grabbed the phone. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped it as I dialed 911. I told the operator someone was outside my home, that they were trying to get in. She told me officers were on the way to stay on the line. But then I heard floorboards creaking inside the hallway. Whoever had been outside was now inside. I didn't wait to see them. I bolted for the back door, flung it open, and sprinted into the woods. The branches whipped in my arms and face as I ran, lungs burning, fear pushing me faster than I thought possible. I didn't stop until I saw red and blue lights flashing through the trees ahead. When the police searched the cabin, they found nothing. No broken locks, no footprints, no sign of forced entry. To them, it looked like I had imagined it. But I knew better. I knew what I saw. I never spent another night in that cabin. I told myself I would go back one day, but I never did. The place still stands, silent and waiting. Sometimes I wonder if the figure still lingers there, watching from the trees, waiting for me to return. And at night, when the world is quiet and I hear tapping in my dreams, I wonder if I ever truly escaped. When I was 15, I thought the scariest thing about being home alone was boredom. That night proved me wrong. My parents had gone out to the casino, planning to be gone until morning, and it was just me and my black lab, Abby. I remember sitting in my room, laptop open, chatting with friends online and watching YouTube videos. The glow of the screen painting my face in blue light. It was quiet, normal, nothing unusual until Abby started barking. Her bark was deep, frantic, not the kind of sound she made for something harmless. She was facing the living room window, ears pinned back, tail stiff, her entire body radiating tension. I froze, my fingers hovering above the keyboard. My first thought was that my parents had come home early. But when I peeked through the blinds, the driveway was empty, except for my dad's car. I told myself maybe she heard a neighbor's car door slam or some late night traffic on the road out front. But her barking didn't stop. Every few minutes, she would sprint to another part of the house, growling, her nails clicking against the floor. That was when I started hearing it. Took knocks, faint at first, then louder. One at the living room door, another at the side door. My heart skipped beats as I tried to make sense of it. My parents? No, they would have used their keys. A friend? No one just shows up unannounced this late at night. I slowly walked to the living room, every creak of the floorboards making me flinch. I checked the front door. Still locked. But then, from somewhere else, I heard the unmistakable sound of a doorknob turning. It wasn't the front door, it was the basement door. My stomach dropped. The basement wasn't an obvious entrance. To get to it, you had to walk around the house, under the deck, and find the hidden door at the back. Whoever was there either knew about it already, or had been circling my house, looking for a way in. Abby's growls grew louder, more feral than I had ever heard before. She bolted down the stairs, teeth bared, barking at the basement door as it rattled. I stood frozen, my mind screaming at me to move. Finally, I snapped out of it. I called Abby back, slammed the basement door shut, and locked it. I grabbed the landline phone, I didn't even have a cell yet, and darted into my parents' room. Inside the closet, I pulled down the box where my dad kept his handgun. I wasn't even sure if it was loaded, but just holding it gave me a tiny bit of control in the chaos. I was about to dial 911 when the front door suddenly opened. Abby tore across the house, barking wildly, and I almost pulled the trigger in panic. But then I heard voices, familiar voices, my parents. Relief hit me so hard I almost collapsed. I ran out, breathless, trying to explain everything at once. My mom's face went pale as I described the knocking, the rattling, the basement door. My dad grabbed the gun from my hand and spent the next hour checking every inch of the house, inside and out. He found nothing. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound was magnified in my mind. The wind against the siding, branches brushing the windows. I lay awake until sunrise, waiting for something, anything to happen. The next day, sometime in the afternoon, there was a knock at the front door. I jumped so hard I nearly dropped my drink. My dad answered it, and standing there was my Uncle Pete. He held an envelope in his hand and smiled like nothing was wrong. My dad's face changed immediately, his jaw tightening, his hands balling into fists. I listened from the hallway as Pete said he had tried to stop by last night to drop something off. My stomach twisted. My mom and I exchanged a horrified glance. Last night, that was him. Inside the envelope was a card with a gift card tucked inside. A thank you for helping his daughter me cousin with her softball practice. But nothing about it made sense. Why would he come at nearly midnight? Why not call first? Why try to force open the basement door instead of just leaving the envelope at the front? My dad slammed the door in his face. He didn't yell, but the fury on his face was enough to make it clear Pete wasn't welcome anymore. From that day forward, our family distanced ourselves from him completely. Looking back, the thought that it was my uncle makes the whole thing worse. If it had been a stranger, at least it would have been random. But family? That meant he knew us, knew our routines, knew how to get inside. It wasn't just creepy, it was a betrayal. I still wonder about his intentions that night. Was he really just trying to drop off a card? Or did he want more? The way Abby reacted, the way he rattled that basement door, it didn't feel innocent. Even now, years later, I remember that night in vivid detail. The barking, the knocking, the doorknob turning, and most of all, the realization that sometimes the people we fear most are the ones closest to us. There is a reason so many horror stories begin with the words, "Home Alone." It is a situation almost everyone has experienced, being the only person in the house when the sun goes down, when the quiet of night presses in, when every creak of the floorboard suddenly feels too intentional. In daylight, being alone might feel liberating. At night, it can feel like an invitation for the things you fear most to reveal themselves. The stories of the man in the basement apartment, the cabin owner in the woods, and the teenage girl with her dog are not just isolated events. They are connected by a thread of vulnerability, by the same unsettling truth. Being home alone strips away the illusion of safety. When there is no one else around to reassure you, your mind becomes hyper-aware, catching every sound, every shadow, every small sign that something might be wrong. Sometimes it really is just the house settling. But sometimes, as these people found out, it is something far worse. In the first story, a young man discovered the horrifying reality that someone had been living under his parents' roof without them knowing. He had laughed, drank, and slept, all while a stranger hid in the same house. That realization is chilling because it proves that safety can be breached without a single window breaking. A lock, a wall, a door, all of it is meaningless when the intruder is already inside. The second story took place in the woods, in the kind of isolation many dream about. For years, the cabin owner believed the silence of nature was his greatest comfort. But that silence turned into something oppressive, amplifying the noises that didn't belong. A twig snapping, a slow scratch, a deliberate knock on glass. When you are surrounded by emptiness, even one sound becomes a message. And when you realize the message is directed at you, the isolation becomes a trap. There is no one to call for help, no neighbor close enough to hear your screams. The forest that once felt like freedom becomes a cage. Then there is the girl who learned that not every threat comes from strangers. Sometimes the most frightening people are the ones we know. Her uncle used familiarity as cover, showing up at night, circling the house, testing the doors, as if entitled to entry. She had to listen as her dog barked at the unseen danger, as the basement door rattled with someone determined to come inside. And in the morning, when the truth was revealed, the fear deepened. Because betrayal from family cuts in a way no stranger ever could. These three experiences highlight different kinds of terror, but together they point to a common fear. That the walls around us are thinner than we think, that safety is fragile, and that the places we trust most can become cages with invisible cracks. When you are alone, your senses sharpen. A dripping faucet becomes a heartbeat. The hum of the fridge sounds like breathing. Shadows seem to shift even though you know they should not. This hyper-awareness is your body's way of preparing for danger, a survival mechanism etched into our DNA. Most of the time, it keeps us alive, but it also blurs the line between reality and imagination. The cruel twist is that sometimes your imagination is not wrong. The man under the bed was real. The shadow at the cabin window was real. The hand rattling the basement doorknob was real. And all three were encountered by people who thought they were simply overreacting to the sounds of an empty house. There is another aspect to these stories that makes them resonate. When you are alone and confronted with danger, there is no one to confirm what you are experiencing. No witness, no backup. If you survive, people might question your story, asking if you exaggerated or misunderstood what happened. That isolation extends beyond the event itself. It lingers in the doubt of others and in the unanswered questions. How long had the man been hiding in the house? What did the shadow in the woods really want? What would the uncle have done if he had managed to get inside? The fear does not end when the noise stops or when the intruder is removed. It seeps into every quiet moment that follows. The cabin that once felt like home now feels like a haunted shell. The basement apartment that once represented independence now feels tainted. The family bond that once gave comfort now carries unease. Safety, once lost, is nearly impossible to rebuild. Perhaps the most terrifying truth is that these are not supernatural tales. There were no ghosts, no demons, no cursed houses. These were real people, real intrusions, real threats. That makes them far more disturbing, because if it can happen to them, it can happen to anyone. The man in the basement, the shadow in the woods, the uncle at the due reach of them proves that the greatest horror is not in stories, but in reality. Being home alone is supposed to mean peace and solitude. But as these stories reveal, it can also mean being the only one standing between your world and someone determined to break into it. And when that line blurs, when you are forced to face the possibility that you are not alone, the terror is unlike anything else. It is the terror of realizing that your safe place is not safe, that your walls cannot always protect you, and that sometimes the worst monsters are not hiding in stories, but in the silence of your own home. Home should be the one place where you feel safe. The locks on the doors, the familiarity of the rooms, the comfort of knowing it is yours. These things create the illusion of security, but the stories you have just heard prove how fragile that illusion really is. In the first story, a man discovered that a stranger had been living just feet away from him, hidden in the house he thought he knew so well. It was not a break-in. There were no shattered windows or forced locks. The intruder had slipped in quietly, unseen, and made himself at home in the shadows. That kind of invasion makes you question everything. How long had he been there? How many nights had the man slept while someone else lingered above him? The most terrifying part was not the discovery, but the realization that danger had already been present long before he even noticed. In the second story, the man who sought peace in the woods learned the cruel price of isolation. The silence of nature that once calmed him turned into something menacing. Each sound became sharper, heavier, harder to dismiss. Scratches at the wall, knocks at the glass, a shadow standing outside, waiting. When you live so far from help, there is no comfort in calling for neighbors. There are no nearby lights, no passing cars. When something comes for you in the forest, you are on your own. His escape into the trees was not just about running from a figure at his window, it was about fleeing the realization that his sanctuary had turned into a prison. And in the third story, the threat was not from a stranger at all, but from blood. An uncle, a familiar face, lurking outside his niece's home, testing doors, circling the property in the dead of night. That betrayal struck deeper than any faceless intruder, because when someone who knows you, who's been welcomed into your family, shows up uninvited in the dark, their intentions cannot be innocent. Family is supposed to protect you, not make you afraid. Together, these stories force us to confront a truth we try to ignore. Safety is never guaranteed. We can lock our doors, draw our curtains, and double-check every window, but all it takes is one determined person to shatter that sense of control. Sometimes they are strangers.
Stop right there, now.
Sometimes they are people we thought we could trust. And sometimes, the scariest danger is realizing that you may never know how long they have been near. So what can we do? We trust our instincts. We take every knock, every rattle, every unexplained sound seriously. We secure our homes, keep in contact with people we trust, and remember that fear is not always irrational, it is often a warning. Because the creak in the hallway might not be the house settling, the tapping at the glass might not be the wind, and the shadow at the edge of your vision might not disappear when you close your eyes. This is not superstition. This is not fiction. These are true stories, and they are reminders of the price paid by those who found out too late that they were not alone. Welcome to the price paid. If you made it this far, if you felt the chill crawl down your spine, then subscribe now. Because the next time you hear a noise in the dark, you will remember these stories and you will know the nightmare is real.